Jordan chased Zara for about half a mile with a shadow of persistence and evil. Zara, unaware of the danger, continued on her way without suspecting that evil was already approaching. Suddenly, he appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, grabbed her by the neck with one hand and covered her mouth with the other so that the girl would not scream. He blocked her breathing and then dragged her into the thicket of the forest where darkness and inhumanity awaited the victim. There, in a forgotten corner of the world, hell descended on Zara. He forcibly invaded her body, her soul, leaving only a scream of pain and horror that was lost in the darkness of the night. Despite her desperate attempts to resist, her cries remained unanswered in the ruthless void. This whole nightmare, this terrible aggression lasted for 9 whole minutes, which seemed like an eternity for Zara, who felt fear and hopelessness. Then, as if nothing had happened, Jordan walked back to his house, leaving behind only traces of destruction and an absolute nightmare. But what if all this was just the beginning of an even more eerie and mysterious story? What if the hidden truth about what happened that terrible night turned out to be more confusing and dark than it seemed at first glance? Secrets hidden in the shadows of the past can destroy not only lives, but also destroy all that remains of hope and peace in this world. Only by digging deeper one can find the answers, but there are even more questions hiding behind them. In the winter of 1986, Zara Alina was born in the vast landscapes of Great Britain. She was the first of 5 children of a single mother, a young woman who mysteriously moved her life from the Pakistani slums to this corner of the UK back in 1968. Zara embodied the hopes and dreams of her parents, and her birth was an important event. She was the first granddaughter of Radha Parvin, and it brought her a special status in her community. From early childhood, Zara was surrounded by relatives who raised her to a pedestal, showering her with tenderness and care. She grew up surrounded by numerous studying at a unique school of life where the rules were written in blood and betrayal. Despite their lack of finances, Zara's parents invested everything in their daughter's education, believing that she would be able to find everything she needed for a successful life. Their dreams were strong. Their hopes were stronger. But in this world of dark streets and hidden ambitions, Zara's life was in danger, hanging over her like a dark cloud. From early childhood, the fire of passion and hunger for life burned in Zara's heart. She dived into the world of tap dancing, where every movement, like a note in a symphony of passion, gave birth to beauty and harmony. Swimming was another passion of her soul, allowing her to escape from the gray everyday life and feel the wave of freedom. She always dressed exquisitely, as if creating a work of art from herself, embodying her dreams in every outfit. But that was just the beginning. When she skated for the first time, she felt new breath of freedom in her soul. Skating became not just a hobby for her, but a way of breathing, a way of expressing the deepest essence of her soul. Among those who knew Zara, no one was surprised to hear that she dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Her heart was full of desire to protect and help others because she was that bright ray of hope in a world full of evil. Her friendly nature sparkled with joy, which was contagious like a fire in the dark. Her gaze and sparkling eyes promised miracles, and her black curly hair seemed to have been created to tempt fate. Her image was full of charm, like a magic potion mixing passion, kindness, and courage in an extraordinary cocktail of attractiveness. Already in her teens, she had the opportunity to travel around England and visit museums and galleries. She showed big interest in art and culture. These trips became an indicator of how independent she was. Later, trips to the rest of Europe followed. This was a clear confirmation that she inherited the desire for adventure from her relatives. It seems she was following in the footsteps of her Aunt Farah, who, unlike the rest of the family, chose Portugal over the UK. It was fascinating for a young woman to see the work of her aunt, who worked as a psychotherapist in women's organizations. Zara visited her several times. After graduating from high school, her aspirations began to be realized when she got in the University of Westminster. Since then, she worked hard to achieve her goals while taking care of her mother and grandmother at the same time. Her tiny figure was full of a passionate soul and unstoppable energy. Her sense of justice and equality was not limited to the walls of the lecture hall. On the contrary, The generous and caring Zara supported refugees fleeing violence and sought to give a voice to those who had less power. She also participated in volunteer work in community canteens to help the homeless. In general, she had a special habit of noticing the needs of others and always including them in her schedule. Zara was an easygoing girl. Her Aunt Smira lived nearby, and she often visited her several times a week. While preparing for the exams, she asked her aunt to help her to study, but they always ended up laughing. Zara left a trail of joy behind her everywhere she went, as those who knew her at that time claimed. In addition, she was hardworking, covered all her expenses, and helped her family. She worked at a local clothing store and knew everyone in the area, from teenagers to the elderly. She always greeted everyone with kindness and was willing to help if necessary. The young girl could talk for hours, but it did not affect her ability to listen carefully to others. Her generosity extended to all living creatures, and she especially loved cats. Sometimes she spent her own money to take stray cats to the vet, take care of them at home, or persuade neighbors to take them in. Her friend Sanji Naira described her as radiant and believed that her main gift was the ability to share optimism. When Sanji was in a bad mood, he turned to her for help. In Zara's life, there was a bright star whose name was engraved in the very depths of her heart: Carissa Peters. They were not just friends but companions in the struggle for justice, for protection of women from violence and abuse. Their shared hobbies, especially in the field of women's rights, and it was the connecting thread that carried their friendship through difficulties and trials. Zara and Carissa were so close that they seemed to share the same soul. They easily entered each other's house as if they were their own shelters from the storms of the world, or talked on the phone almost every day discussing the news, their thoughts, and plans for the future. In 2002, after successfully passing the exams and completing her internship in law field, Zara had the opportunity to work in the Crown Prosecution Service. It was an important step and an integral part of her dream to become a full-fledged lawyer. To do this, she worked tirelessly even when her studies were interrupted by worries about her mother and grandmother as well as financial difficulties. This step was important not only for her but also for Carissa and for those who believed in her, who support her on this stormy journey to a bright future. On her first day at her new job, Zara couldn't help but be happy. She sent a smiley selfie to her friends and family, as if announcing to the whole world her new era of life. It wasn't just a new job. It was the last piece in the mosaic of her dreams. She had been coming to this for so long that she could hardly believe in her own happiness. Working as an administrator might seem a secondary post, but for Zara, it was a giant step towards her goal. At the age of 35, she realized that a new stage in her life was beginning, and this made her heart beat with extraordinary force. It wasn't just a working day. It was the beginning of a new era, an era when she felt fulfilled and happy. The new job strengthened her confidence in the fact that it was time to create her own family. She dreamed of her children, how they would be happy and protected, how they would live in a world filled with love and harmony. At that moment, Zara realized that every new day was a step towards her happiness, a step towards her dream of having her own family. With such an active life between work, volunteering, friends, and the attentive care of her mother and grandmother with whom she lived in a separate room when necessary, Zara loved to walk. She liked to move freely. She didn't bother with small things. She could easily put a pair of shoes in her bag to change them for sneakers when needed. Zara believed that a woman should be able to move freely without any obstacles, and even more so that no one should have deprived them of this right. But near her house, there was a man whose existence completely took away this woman's right. His name was Jordan McSweeney. He was a few years younger than Zara, and it was unknown where he was from. One Saturday evening, when the sun had already set below the horizon, Zara was going to meet a friend. Even though she was not in the mood, she decided not to cancel the meeting. Zara's word was as strong as steel, and she always stuck to her promises, not allowing her mood to dictate her actions. Her devotion was as steady as a rock, and she was ready to walk through thick and thin for the sake of her friends. Before leaving, Zara picked up the phone to talk to Aunt Farah, but this time there was a certain anxiety in her voice that did not go unnoticed. Her aunt asked her to be careful, and Zara realized that even if she wasn't going to go far from home, The world around her seemed strange and unpredictable that evening. But she stubbornly told herself that she knew every dark corner of the city, and her name was known to everyone who had ever looked at her. But something about this evening made her heart beat faster, and Zara decided to be more careful. At the appointed time, she met her friend at a local bar called the Ilford Big Spoon, located on the West End of London. Ilford is a lively and diverse London area, an ideal place for dinner and gatherings, so the girls visited this place that Saturday evening. Then they went to another bar, and there Zara drank a couple glasses of water. At the same time, Jordan was having one drink after another at another nearby nightclub. An idea was forming in his mind, and he refused to resist it. He intended to find a woman to attack that evening. Surveillance cameras recorded how Jordan met women at the entrance to the club, hugged them without their consent, and tried to kiss them. He was particularly persistent with one of the employees, despite her obvious reluctance. He was kicked out of the club a little after 23 o'clock, and his inappropriate behavior remained recorded on cameras. When he came out, his actions were recorded by cameras as he walked along Romford Street towards the park. Seeing the woman walking, Jordan followed her and approached her closely. Although she tried to avoid him by entering the store, he was waiting for her outside. When the woman cautiously left, Jordan followed her again. Then he walked down the other side of the street, leaving her in sight. However, when the woman entered her house, Jordan had no choice but to continue on his way. According to the surveillance camera's data, at about 2 a.m. on Cranbrook Street, Jordan noticed a woman approaching him. Suddenly, he quickened his pace, approaching her. But on the video, you can see that two passing witnesses noticed Jordan's strange actions. Despite the man's suspicious behavior, the woman returned home safely, leaving Jordan surprised and annoyed. He returned to Cranbrook Street without success. At this time, Zara and her friend, deciding to return home, left the bar when it was 2 a.m. A friend took a taxi, preferring convenience, while Zara, given the short distance and good weather, decided to walk. They parted, and Zara headed down the residential street of Cranbrook, which is a 10-minute walk from her house. That's when Jordan noticed her. According to the Chief Inspector Dave Williams, Jordan had a clear intention. He was going to attack a woman that night regardless of the location. Cranbrook Street remained busy even in the early morning hours. There was a constant flow of traffic. At the age of 13, Jordan had already been sentenced in Kent Juvenile Court for various offenses committed between 2006 and 2009. In August 2010, when he was 17 years old, he was found guilty of assaulting a girl, leaving her with a swollen eye, and he was given a 4-month detention and correction period. 11 years later, he attacked another woman, and he was again banned from approaching a woman, this time for 3 years. During this time, he had no right to contact her directly or indirectly. By 2010, Jordan had 28 convictions for 69 crimes, including theft, assaults on police and the public, criminal cases, theft of motor vehicles, traffic violations, committing crimes with bail, and shoplifting. On his page on a well-known social network, he bragged about having a huge collection of weapons, and in general extolled a criminal lifestyle to the sky, posting different photos and quotes. He also posted fake pictures saying that the FBI was looking for him. On June 17, 2022, he was released on parole after being sentenced to prison for criminal damage, racially aggravated harassment, and illegal carrying of a bladed weapon. One of the conditions was meetings with a parole officer. Jordan settled into a van on St. Valentine Street in a 130 acres park in the south of Gun Hill, the largest green space in London's Red Bridge district. He again violated all agreements and, true to his criminal background, missed not one, but 2 meetings with a parole officer. As a result, the authorities refused to give him the advantage. The parole service began the procedure for returning him to prison on June 22nd, 2022, but they did not immediately inform the police, but only 2 days later. Early on Saturday morning, June 25th, police visited Jordan's mother's house to arrest him and found an unpleasant surprise. He was not there. Around 2:30 a.m. on June 26, 2022, the streets of Ilford witnessed a terrible crime. Zara was found on the sidewalk with signs of abuse on her body. Her belongings were scattered as if the mess in her life was embodied in the streets. Her body was bruised, her clothes were torn, and her eyes showed struggle for survival. A woman passing by immediately realized that the situation was extremely serious. Without hesitation, she began to give Zara a closed chest massage and do CPR, trying to give her the last hope of survival. But the injuries inflicted on her body turned out to be too serious. Even with all the help of passers-by and emergency medical help, it was too late. Zara fought for her life, but the severe wounds and brutality of the crime were too strong. At 9:58 a.m. on Sunday, she passed away, leaving only the painful traces of a struggle behind. At that time, at about 11 a.m. in the park, Jordan, recorded by security cameras, was getting rid of evidence, throwing out his clothes. With his indifferent and cold-blooded demeanor, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The police responded quickly and knocked on Zara's grandmother's door, asking her to identify her granddaughter from the bar's video footage. When she confirmed that it was her, the police finally explained to her what had happened. Zara's uncle Qasim Alina called the rest of the family, including Aunt Farah, to tell them what had happened. In Portugal, her aunt, crying, remembered the call on Saturday night. After she broke the news to her children, Farah immediately flew to London. The family was in shock, trembling with horror. It was difficult for all of them to eat, sleep, or talk. Although they hardly dared to mention Zara's death, they also could not think of anything else. Meanwhile, detectives immediately began investigating the area where Zara was found. One of the first steps was to collect video footage from surveillance cameras to track the attacker's movements. This, along with the bloody fingerprints left near the scene, allowed them to identify Jordan. They then tracked his location using a video surveillance system. After receiving images of the main suspect, Inspector Dave sent an officer to Gun Hill to check if anyone else recognized Jordan. The operation was successful, and almost immediately they found Jordan sleeping in his van. The authorities immediately arrested him. Confused and stunned, Jordan had no resistance during the arrest. Clothes and shoes stained with blood were found in his trailer, which Jordan was trying to get rid of. Despite many hours of interrogation, Jordan remained silent, refusing to reveal his name or give details of his life. At the same time, new video footage continued to appear, allowing police to reconstruct the chronology of events. The crime led parole officer Justin Russell to highlight a number of errors in the treatment of Jordan. It was noted that Jordan had been a criminal since the age of 16, both in and out of prison, which made him a high-risk criminal. He had been a high-risk criminal since the age of 16, but it turned out that he had not been treated appropriately. They should have taken more urgent measures to return him to prison after he missed scheduled supervision appointments upon release from detention, but they didn't do it. On Wednesday, June 29th, through a press release read by the police, Zara's family expressed how shocking the last few days have been. Logically, for them, it was an irreparable loss. Nevertheless, they stressed that the warmth and kindness shown by people were valuable to them and served as evidence of the strength of their beloved Zara's spirit. The family had a lot to do, and they needed to find strength. Aunt Farah communicated with the media and met with the police. Despite the shock and grief her family, especially her aunt, taking into account her own experience in this field, knew that it was necessary to control the situation and protect Zara from accusations from certain media. On July 1st, 2022, a preliminary hearing was held in the Jordan case. And on September 30th the same year, a date was set for a hearing to prepare testimony in the trial. However, on the day of the scheduled trial, Jordan did not show up due to a positive test for COVID-19, and the hearing had to be postponed. On Saturday, July 2nd, a memorial service was held in memory of Zara, organized by her family, which took place on the way to her home, symbolizing the last journey that never ended. At this service, many of those present were dressed in white, symbolizing a silent walk. The event was attended by a coalition of more than 120 organizations specializing in supporting women, expressing solidarity in the fight against violence. It was one of the many groups that worked with Zara Alina's family. As they stated in the media, they demanded justice and taking responsibility. Additionally, they asked to focus on what they considered a priority and key issue, to resist violence from men and to stop the acts of violators. At a preliminary hearing before the investigation at the East London court in Walthamstow, crime scene investigator Nadia Persut said she believes there is reason that local police officers could and should have taken more action to find Jordan before his attack on Zara. Consequently, she expressed the opinion that jury should resolve this issue. In addition, this investigation should have included the actions of the staff of corrections facilities for probationers. According to Nadia, this process was supposed to last a month. On November 16, 2022, Jordan also did not appear at the hearing despite being told that this was mandatory. Thus, the meeting was organized via video call. This time, he pleaded guilty. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow then described him as extremely unfit candidate for bail. This opinion was also supported by Judge Shimagrove. As for the verdict, the judge postponed it until December 14th the same year. Approaching this date, Jordan again refused to appear in court. But even this did not prevent Jordan from being sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 33 years in prison for the murder of Zara Alina. The accused and his representatives filed an appeal, and the sentence was reduced to 33 years in prison. The judge stated that the fact that Zara was unconscious, did not feel anything, and did not suffer reduced his sentence. Just 4 months later, it became known that Jordan had an intimate relationship with a woman who worked at the Belmar Correctional Service in South London, but was not a direct employee of the prison services. The Metropolitan Police later announced that a 32-year-old woman, whose identity was not disclosed, had been arrested and was under investigation on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. As for Zara Alina's family, everyone remembers Zara with love and pride. They still miss her. For her part, Aunt Farah continues to speak out against violence against women and girls. In March 2023, she joined a march organized by various groups seeking to draw attention to the issue and raise awareness. The protesters marched through the commercial district of West London to Trafalgar Square. Among various slogans, they stated that the lack of action against male violence is equal to abuse by the state. The tragic loss of Zara Alina has only added dark shades to this bloody picture of violence that consumes the hearts and minds of those who seek to change the world. Jody Lee Ann Sanderholm was born September 26, 1987 in Arkansas City. To Brian and Cindy Sanderholm, she was the third child of her parents. She had a brother called Jason and a sister called Jennifer. From a young age, Jody was fond of dancing. And although it played a large role in Jody's life, she also did not neglect her studies. She was one of 4 valedictorians in her graduating class. While in high school, Jody was a member of the National Honor Society, a Kansas State Scholar, a Kansas Board of Regents Scholar, and earned the Outstanding Physics Student of the Year award presented by David Steinemetzy. She was a member of the Ark City High School dance team for 4 years. 2 of those 4 years, she was the captain. Jody was a member instructor of Ark City Dance and a Universal Dance Association instructor. After high school, she attended Cowley College where she studied pre-pharmacy. While at Cowley, she was a member of the Cowley Tiggerette dance line. In 2007, the population of Arkansas City was about 12,000. Jody's parents, like probably other locals, thought it was a good and relatively safe place to live and raise children. However, after Jody disappeared and the details of what happened to her became known, many began to realize that safety was only an illusion and that the man was the most dangerous beast. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jody drove her car, a Dodge Stratus, to college for a dance rehearsal that was scheduled to end at 10:45. After the rehearsal, she intended to return home. Cindy called her daughter's cell phone several times, but she didn't answer, which was highly unusual. Jody always kept in touch with her family, and even if she missed a call, she would call back soon. Cindy had a bad feeling about this. She decided to get off work and go home to see if Jody was all right. When she arrived, she immediately noticed that her daughter's car was not in front of the house, and this only increased her anxiety because Cindy knew that by this time, Jody should have been back from rehearsal. Upon entering the house and looking around, Cindy realized that Jody had not returned home. Her dance uniform, which she put in the washing machine when she returned from rehearsal, was not there or in the hamper for her dirty clothes. The shower stall was dry, although Jody always showered after dance class. It soon became clear that Jody had no contact with her father or older sister, Jennifer, either. She had an appointment at noon to which she never showed up. Cindy and Brian began calling their daughter's friends, hoping to find out where she might be. But after the morning rehearsal ended and Jody left college, none of her friends saw her. That evening, the college dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game with a routine of which Jody was the choreographer. She wouldn't have missed it of her own free will, but she didn't show up either. At about 6 p.m., still unable to learn anything and without waiting for their daughter to return home, Cindy and Brian contacted the police and reported her missing. Officers from the sheriff's office immediately put together flyers depicting and describing Jody, began to inquire about her last known whereabouts, and put out an APB on the vehicle she was traveling in. The police learned from Cindy and Brian that Jody had a boyfriend she had been dating since high school. His name was Colby Wilson. When contacted by phone, he reported that he had been at his brother's house in Texas for several days. The police quickly ruled him out as a potential suspect because his stay in another state was confirmed. The next day, January 6th, was very eventful. Lori Leglider, Jody's best friend with whom they had been friends in dance since high school, provided the police with important information. They both enrolled at Cowley College where they went on to study dance. Lori reported that she left work at Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m. Tuesday, January 2nd, and noticed a light blue car drive by the restaurant several times as she left. On her way home, she noticed a car following her in her rearview mirror. "I thought something strange was going on," Lori told the detectives. She decided to see if the car behind her was really following her, so she started turning onto different streets. The driver of the car behind her was doing the same thing, and it really scared Lori. She drove to the local police station and parked next to it, thinking that the stalker would leave her alone. She didn't see him after she stopped, so she drove home again. However, she had to go back to the parking lot near the police station because she saw the car chasing her again. Lori sat in the car for a while before driving home. She told the detectives that she didn't go to the station because she thought it was someone else's stupid prank, but that wasn't really all. On Friday, January 5th, the band Tigerette Dance Line was rehearsing at the college. According to Lori, she and Jody got there around the same time and, as usual, parked not far from each other. Lori spotted the light blue car again. What's more, she recognized the man behind the wheel. It was a local resident, 23-year-old Justin Thurber. Lori did not know him personally, but had seen him several times in the company of his older brother and his friends. Lori and Jody left practice at the same time and were supposed to meet up later, but Jody never showed up for that meeting. Soon, several members of the dance team revealed that they too had seen Justin near the college during the past week. He always sat in his car in the parking lot and just watched. Within the first 24 hours of Jody's disappearance, police had driven all over the city but could not find her car. Arkansas City is surrounded by fields and wooded areas. They brought in a fixed-wing aircraft to search the area from the air. The car was more difficult to hide than a person because of its size, so the police hoped to be able to see Jody's car from the air. It was determined that the last time her cell phone signal was received, it was from a cell tower located near the Kaw Wildlife Area. This is a vast wooded area along the Arkansas River. At this point in the investigation, only one person, Justin Eugene Thurber, who was identified by Lori Leglider and other members of the dance group, was considered as a person who might be involved in the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm. It is important to note here that despite his young age, Thurber was well known to the police. 3 years earlier, in 2004, he had been charged with illegal possession of banned substances. He eventually received a suspended sentence and was released. 3 months after that, he was arrested for theft and probation violation. In October 2005, he was charged with disorderly conduct. 3 months later, he was arrested for petty theft and again found to be in possession of a controlled substance. On December 31st, 2006, which was just 6 days before Jody disappeared, Thurber was arrested again for theft. That same day, after paying a $3,000 bail, he was free. Having had a merry New Year's Eve, the next day, January 1st, He began impersonating a police officer and disrupting public order. When the real cops came for him, Thurber complained of chest pain and was taken to the hospital instead of the station. Why he was not arrested after his discharge from the hospital remains unclear, nor is it quite clear why he managed to get away with it all the time. A relative of his who works for the Cowley County Police may have contributed to this, but that's only a guess. That same day, January 6th, a police officer saw Thurber's car, a light blue Cadillac, parked outside his parents' house and decided to talk to him. His father invited the officer into the house. When the police officer asked Justin where he had been yesterday, he said he had driven his car to Winfield, a town about 13 miles outside of Arkansas City, in the morning. There, according to Justin, he met up with his friend and two of his friend's buddies, whom he did not personally know very well. Next, the four of them began driving around the countryside in a car belonging to one of his friend's buddies until the car got stuck on a dirt road near Cedarville. Then, as Thurber claimed, he walked toward Arkansas City, which is about 30 miles from Cedarville. After 6 hours, he got tired of walking and called his father to pick him up. Thurber's father confirmed what he said, saying he picked Justin up wet and dirty, a couple of miles from Cowley State Fishing Lake. Justin also told the police officer that his car, which he left in Winfield, had been returned by friends. The story wasn't very convincing, but there was nothing to charge Thurber with yet, so the officer left. That same evening, officers spoke with Alexis Swartzel, who recently ended a 3-year relationship with Thurber. She told officers Thurber often took her to the Kaw Wildlife Area, southeast of Arkansas City, and she pointed out places she and Thurber would visit. When the police informed Alexis that they were investigating the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm, she was very surprised and said that Justin had once said that he had begun watching Jody when he was 13 years old. He would peep at her when she was swimming in the pool in her backyard and sometimes in the evenings, peek through the window in her room, and wait for her to start changing clothes. Police asked Alexis about her reasons for breaking up with Thurber, to which she said she had broken up with him because he was too abusive and had strange tendencies that were becoming more and more frequent. On several occasions, she said, during intimacy, he would choke her unconscious. On top of that, he asked her to fight him because he could not get aroused any other way. It was becoming more and more obvious to the police by the minute that Justin Thurber might be involved in Jody's disappearance. The police had no evidence to link him to the girl's disappearance. But late in the evening of January 6th, Thurber was arrested anyway. Detective Eric Mata arrested Thurber on bail revocation and suspicion of criminal trespass because the investigation into Jody Sanderholm's disappearance revealed that Thurber was on the college campus where the detective believed Thurber should not be. Thurber told Mata that he wanted to talk to his lawyer. At the same time, police officers arrived at Justin's parents' house with a search warrant. The officers took the shoes Justin had been wearing the day before when his father picked him up. The shoes were wet and were drying on a towel. Thurber's father told police he helped his son clean the mud off the shoes. The clothes Justin was wearing when his father picked him up were also recovered, but by this time, he had had time to wash them. The next day, January 7th, searchers trained to identify human activity in rugged terrain set to work in the Kaw Wildlife Area. They found shoe prints that matched Justin Thurber's as well as several other smaller shoe prints. As darkness fell, they decided to continue the search the next day. On the way home, some searchers drove past Cowley County State Fishing Lake and decided to stop because they heard Thurber was wet when his father picked him up. They discovered a muddy tire track, muddy shoe prints near a public restroom, mail addressed to Jody Sanderholm's parents in a chemical toilet, dance shoes in another toilet, and a flip-flop sandal. Investigators later retrieved cut-off sweatshorts, a wallet containing Jody Sanderholm's driver's license and social security card, her black leotard, a Tigarette jacket with Jody Sanderholm's first name on the front, a vehicle floor mat, and a car seat cushion. The sandal matched the impressions found at the Kaw Wildlife Area. Searchers spent the next 2 days around Cowley County State Fishing Lake in the Kaw Wildlife Area. On January 9th, specialists with sonar brought in to survey the bottom of the lake discovered Jody's sunken car. On the same day, the hope of the Sanderholm family ulcer guide. Jody's naked body was found under a pile of leaves, logs, and twigs at the Kaw Wildlife Area. Authorities found DNA evidence linking Justin Thurber to both Jody's car and her body. The car had been in the lake for more than 3 days, so police feared that the water that filled the interior had destroyed all evidence. That was partly true. Forensics spent a great many hours before they found a short hair in the interior. Carrie Melton, director of the Forensic DNA Testing Lab, ran mitochondrial DNA tests on the hair found on the driver's seat of Jody Sanderholm's car and concluded that it was almost certainly Justin Thurber's hair. Barbara Leal, an employee of a private DNA testing company, tested samples taken from Jody Sanderholm's right biceps and right side of her chest. She concluded that Thurber could not have been excluded as a participant, although 99% of the population could have been excluded. Cell tower data showed that on the day Jody disappeared, her phone and Justin Thurber's phone were in the same areas at the same time. Lori Leglighter, Jody's best friend, said she saw Thurber in the college parking lot the day she disappeared. When the police looked at the camera footage provided by the college administration, they were convinced that Lori was telling the truth. Thurber was in the college parking lot at the same time rehearsal was going on, and he left that parking lot at the same time as Jody. The tape showed that Thurber followed Jody in his light blue Cadillac. Based on the fact that letters addressed to Jody's parents were found near the lake, investigators speculated that Thurber had followed Jody from the college to her home, and when she got out to retrieve the letters from the mailbox, he attacked her, pushed her into her own car, and drove her away. That theory was confirmed when a shoe print identical to the sole of Justin Thurber's sneakers was found next to the Sanderholm family mailbox. As previously mentioned, footprints of Thurber's shoes and smaller shoe impressions were found at the Caw Wildlife Area. It was determined that these were the footprints of Jody's shoes found at the fishing lake along with her other belongings. Thurber's footprints and Jody's footprints in the preserve were located side by side. Walking along them, at one point, the searchers saw that Jody's footprints were interrupted and Justin's footprints went deep into the woods. This meant that he was carrying the girl further on his own. His shoe prints were also found where the body had been found. All 3 of the people Justin said he had been with the day of Jody's disappearance denied what he said. They had not seen Thurber that day, which meant his story about the car being stuck near Cedarvale was a fabrication. The 3 officers drove Thurber to Cedarvale so he could show them where he said he was. Thurber was unable to determine where he said the car was stuck. Back at the police station, Thurber volunteered to take a polygraph test. He also requested that his relative, Chad Monroe, who worked for the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during the questioning. The evidence found was sufficient to indict Justin Thurber. He himself denied guilt, and the judge set his bail at $1 million. Thurber's attorneys tried to convince the court that he was mentally retarded and incompetent, but were unable to do so. Thurber had graduated from high school and even attended college for some time, so the judge found the defense claim of his mental retardation unproven. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy testified at the trial. He said that the first time he looked at the body, he had no doubt that the last hours of Jody's life were very painful. Her entire body and face were covered with bruises and abrasions. There were clear signs of strangulation on her neck. It was strangulation that was named as the cause of death of Jody Sanderholm. I can't say all the information about what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. Not all horror movie maniacs are as brutal as Thurber was to Jody. Without going into detail, and at the same time to give you some idea of what happened at the Caw Wildlife Area, I will say the following. The crime was motivated by carnal desire, and Thurber committed the crime with a stick. At trial, in addition to Thurber's ex-girlfriend, 6 other women testified, each claiming that the defendant stalked her. One of them was a co-worker of his. In one case, she even had to call the police to have an officer walk her to her car after work. It was already dark and she was afraid to go to the parking lot because she saw Justin waiting for her. Earlier, he had left a rose and a note under the windshield wiper of her car saying he liked her and wanted to get to know her better. Several witnesses said they saw Jody Sanderholm's car on January 5, 2007. Carrie Morris, a friend of Jody's, noticed that Jody was sitting in the as their cars passed each other in Arkansas City shortly after noon. Morris reported that the man behind the wheel of Jody's car appeared to be a large man. She called Jody's cell phone but received no answer. 2 other women reported seeing a vehicle that looked like Jody Sanderholm's car while driving on a dirt road south of Arkansas City around 3 p.m. One of them said the driver was Thurber and identified him in court. On February 17, 2009, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, finding Thurber guilty on all counts and recommending that he be sentenced to death. Realizing what sentence the judge would hand down, Thurber tried to negotiate a plea bargain. His lawyer told the prosecutor that Justin would plead guilty if he were not given the capital punishment. Jody's family opposed such a deal. The presiding judge took the jury's decision into consideration and sentenced Thurber to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, the state of Kansas signed the Jody Act, which, among other things, expands police authority over stalking suspects and expands the list of actions that can be considered stalking. Since the sentencing, Justin Thurber has not abandoned his attempts to appeal the court's decision. His attorneys are trying to prove that Thurber is mentally retarded. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court postponed Thurber's death sentence, citing a Supreme Court of the United States ruling that the execution of defendants, even those with mild developmental disabilities, is unconstitutional. The Sanderholm family said a competency hearing was held during the original trial, and Thurber was found to be fully competent at the time. Jody's mother, Cindy Sanderholm, sat in the courtroom 11 years after her daughter's passing. She said that Thurber had written letters to other girls while in prison, and this should show that he was competent. That's sick. It's just sick, Cindy said. It tells you that he is competent enough to reach out to people and write letters. He knows what he is doing. I'm sure she, Jody, pleaded for her life, and he didn't give it to her. She didn't get a second choice. She didn't get a second chance, she added. In August 2021, the Kansas Supreme Court issued an opinion announcing that a state law passed in 2020 allows Thurber, who is appealing a death sentence, to seek appointment by the Cowley County District Court of an attorney to assist in post-conviction DNA testing. Thus, even 16 years after Jody Sanderholm's passing, the final word in this case has yet to be spoken. It should also be noted that no one has been executed since Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994. The last time anyone was executed in Kansas was in 1960-65. Since then, besides Thurber, 9 other people have been sentenced to death, but no sentence has been carried out. We haven't executed anyone in that time frame, and there's no timetable to have any other future executions, said Adam Pfannenstiel, the communications spokesperson for Kansas Department of Corrections. I think it's a little shocking that Kansas reinstated the death penalty over 20 years ago, and there's not a plan yet, said Jennifer Aldridge, Jody's older sister. I thought this would have been something that would have been discussed 20 years ago when it was reinstated. Therefore, even if Thurber's death sentence is upheld, there is a good chance that it will never be carried out. 39-year-old Justin Thurber remains at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. According to a Kansas Legislative Post-Audit Committee report published in 2014, each of the inmates serving time in administrative segregation at El Dorado comes with an annual cost of nearly $49,000 further. It is not only the cost to house an inmate sentenced to death. Taxpayers also pay nearly 4 times the price to prosecute a case where the death penalty, if pursued by the prosecution, $395,000 per case compared to only $100,000 per case when the death penalty is not sought. For the Sanderholms, taxes are added insult to an unbearable injury and a grueling wait for justice in the case of their daughter, Jody. It hurts me so bad every week when I see my paycheck, and I know I'm paying tax money to feed him, said Brian Sanderholm. Death is what he deserves, and that's what the law stated, said Cindy Sanderholm. So we need to get the law fixed so we can use it. If it was your daughter, your son, it was our daughter, what would you want to have happen? Asked Brian Sanderholm. Most regrettably, Cynthia and Sanderholm, Jody's mother, passed away on December 2, 2022 at the age of 63. Paddy Moriarty was born in Ireland but relocated to Australia in 1966 at the age of 19. On February 5th, he settled permanently in the remote outback town of Larima. Including Paddy, Larima had 11 residents. The town lies along the Stewart Highway, approximately 300 miles south of Darwin. On the evening of December 16, 2017, Paddy was at his usual spot, the pub in the Pink Panther Hotel. He was accompanied, as always, by his loyal red Kelpie dog, Kelly. Paddy had nearly always owned a dog, but Kelly was new, just a year old. Paddy typically drank 8 beers a night, sometimes more if he was enjoying himself. Around sunset that evening, he headed home. A passing tourist gave Paddy the remains of a store-bought rotisserie chicken to share with Kelly as a treat. After that night, Paddy and Kelly were never seen again. The police were contacted 72 hours after Paddy's last sighting by Barry Sharp, the Pink Panther's publican, who became concerned when Paddy broke his usual routine. Evidence suggests Paddy returned home that night but didn't stay long. The date-stamped chicken wrapper from the tourist was discovered inside the microwave at Paddy's home, located across the Stewart Highway from the Pink Panther Hotel. There were no signs of struggle in the home, but police found Paddy's eyeglasses and hat, which he was rarely ever seen without due to his baldness, left in the house. Paddy's calendar, which was from February 16th but had 02/dates handwritten into the boxes, showed that the last day crossed off was December 15th, the day before he was last seen, as though Paddy did not finish the night of the at-home. The remote and dangerous landscape could have played a part in Paddy and Kelly going missing. Everything from sinkholes to wild boars could conceivably have played a part in the case. However, the tense social situation in the tiny town could also have been the cause of the mystery. The handful of residents in Laramure had once been very close. However, over the years, seemingly petty concerns had divided the town. A tea house owned by Fran Hodgett sold, among other things, homemade meat pies. At some point, the Pink Panther Hotel also began selling them. The competition in the small town was controversial, and Paddy, a fixture at his beloved Pink Panther, was quick to tell tourists that Fran's pies were inferior. Fran, whose home and business were almost directly across the highway from Paddy's home, of course, did not appreciate this. Rumors eventually began spreading throughout the town about Fran's quality of ingredients, and the camaraderie between the townspeople quickly deteriorated. There were, of course, probably other issues at play in the town, but the residents of Larima have been far more reluctant to speak publicly about them. Fran has alleged that Paddy did everything from trying to poison her patrons to throwing a dead kangaroo onto her property. She was reported to have said that she wanted to kill Paddy, but she maintains that she only made that statement as an expression to indicate her frustration with him. Fran's gardener, who also lived on the property, Owen Laurie, has also been looked on with suspicion in Larima, but his relatively recent arrival in town may also be a cause for that. On the night Paddy was last seen, Owen attempted to make 2 phone calls, neither of which connected, from a public phone booth outside Fran's property at approximately the time Paddy would have been going by on his way home from the pub. Police say they have no indication that the calls play into Paddy's disappearance. All 10 remaining residents of Larima have been interviewed by police, and all 10 have denied involvement in the disappearance of Paddy and Kelly. Almost all of them were also called to give evidence at a coroner's inquest into Paddy's presumed death in June 2018. The inquest was halted despite only being partially heard. Investigators have looked at animal shelters throughout the Northern Territory, hoping that Kelly may have been dropped off at one and provide them with a lead, but have had no success. In October 2018, was forced to put the Pink Panther Hotel up for auction when he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer and could no longer handle the work of running the establishment. Police continue to investigate Paddy's case as an unsolved homicide. Christina Voltaire's life was a string of challenges that she worked hard to overcome. Born in Haiti, Christina was separated from her father at age 11 when he was able to immigrate to the United States. She was reunited with him when she too was able to immigrate as a teenager, but this meant being away from her mother and siblings back in Haiti. Christina planned to remedy this challenge by getting an education and earning a good enough living to bring the rest of her family to the United States. At the beginning of 2011, Christina was close to completing the first part of that goal. A student in nuclear medicine at Kaiser University, Christina had completed most of the coursework she needed for her degree. She was living alone in an apartment in the Berkshire apartment complex in Winter Haven, Florida. Christina was also still coping with another hardship in her life. She was weeks away from the 1-year anniversary of the death of her infant daughter. The medical examiner was never able to identify a cause of death for baby Audrey. Those close to Christina say that while she had been devastated by Audrey's death, she was coping with the loss as well as could be expected. The last place Christina was publicly seen was at an IHOP at 11:30 in the morning. She had a leisurely meal and told a former coworker who was working at the restaurant that she was feeling ill. She called to postpone a hair appointment before heading home to rest. At approximately 7 p.m. that night, Christina had a knock on her door. It was her friend and neighbor, Charles Pierre Gill. Charles's car had broken down while he was driving home. He walked back to their apartment complex to call his mechanic and wanted to borrow Christina's tan Hyundai Elantra to drive back to his disabled vehicle and look it over his mechanic. According to Charles, Christina was still not feeling well. She was dressed in a black robe and drinking a cup of tea. She was trying to complete some studying. Christina gave Charles her set of keys and he locked the door of her apartment as he went out to get her car. He drove back to his own car where the mechanic gave him bad news about the state of his engine. Charles then drove to his mother's house to pick up 2 plates of food. He then drove back to his apartment complex and went to Christina's unit to return her keys. When Charles entered the apartment just 45 minutes after he had left, Christina was gone. The black robe she had been wearing was laying on her bed. There were no signs of struggle in the apartment. Christina's purse and laptop were still there. Without her car, she had no way of getting very far on her own. When Christina did not come back home, Charles called the police. Christina's relationships with both Charles and his brother, Dussel, have been areas of interest in Christina's sudden disappearance. According to Charles, he and Christina were just good friends and were never romantically involved. Christina had, however, been romantically involved with Dussel. Dussel had believed that Christina's daughter, Audrey, had been his daughter as well. A few months after Audrey's death, he had been trying to file an insurance claim for the costs of her funeral. To do so, he needed to provide her birth certificate. When he looked at it, he found out that Christina had listed another man as the child's father. While this might have made some men angry, Dussel claims that it only left him disappointed. Because Christina was still so upset about Audrey's death, he did not want to fight with her over not being Audrey's biological father, so he calmly ended their relationship. Christina's father, however, paints a very different picture of Christina's relationship with both of the brothers. He claims that Christina was in fact romantically involved with Charles. He further alleges that Dussel had been hostile towards Christina in recent months because of this relationship. He claims to have received a phone call at 1 a.m. a few months before Christina went missing in which his daughter told him that Dussel had been physically aggressive towards her. Dussel had been charged with a violent offense before, although he had been acquitted on that charge. Some of Christina's actions do seem to indicate that she feared for her physical safety. On the morning of the day she disappeared, Christina visited the management office of her apartment and asked to have her locks changed. A work order was put in, but the locks were not changed that day. Both Charles and Dussel claimed that they did not have keys to the apartment, although Charles did have Christina's key when he came back to drop off her car keys. Christina never spoke to anyone, including her father, about why she wanted the locks changed. According to Dussel, he had been in Fort Lauderdale, a more than 3-hour drive from Winter Haven when Christina vanished. He had left Winter Haven at approximately noon on January 8th to make the drive. He was in Fort Lauderdale to see his girlfriend who had recently given birth to the couple's daughter. Dussel said in a media interview about a month after Christina was last seen that ATM and cell records should confirm his alibi. The quality of the surveillance tapes Winter Haven police first received from Fort Lauderdale was not high to identify Dussel on them. However, police did eventually receive enough evidence to corroborate Dussel's alibi. If she is still alive, Christina will turn 31 in August 2019. Michelle Jolene Lakey, who preferred to be called by her middle name, was 11 years old in 1986. She and her family lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Her family consisted of her mother and 3 older siblings. Her parents were estranged, and she had not spoken to her father in 3 years. On August 26th, she went to visit her mother, Lois Dunham, in Mercy Hospital, a facility now called the Regional Hospital of Scranton. Since her mother was in the hospital, she planned to spend the night with a friend. Before heading to that friend's house, however, Jolene had to walk home from the hospital. The walk should have only taken 15 minutes. She was seen walking on North Washington Avenue, the street where she lived. However, she never made it to her home in its 1300 block. Jolene seemingly vanished into thin air in broad daylight. A massive effort was launched by the local community to cover Scranton and posters with Jolene's picture. The effort brought forth an unconfirmed sighting of Jolene getting into a light yellow vehicle just a block away from her home. This sighting would become relevant a few years later when police finally had a person of interest in Jolene's case. Frank O'Seleny is currently serving a life sentence for the 1989 rape and murder of 9-year-old Renee Waddell. At his trial in 1990, police received a tip that O'Seleny had been seen with a young girl at Lake Wallenpaupa's is strengthened by the fact that Jolene knew O'Seleny. Jolene was known to visit the auto repair shop O'Seleny owned to play with his dog. O'Seleny did not own a light yellow car, but his line of work gave him access to numerous vehicles at any one time. When interviewed about Jolene, O'Seleny admitted knowing her and even claimed he gave the little girl rides on occasion, but denied any involvement in her disappearance. Police have not been able to find evidence firmly connecting him to the case. Jolene's mother moved her family out of Scranton and into New York State and, ultimately, Rhode Island after Jolene went missing, but she and Jolene's siblings regularly returned to Scranton in August. They walked the route Jolene took from the hospital that day and symbolically complete the walk home she was not able to finish in 1986. A kiosk displaying Jolene's full name now stands in Courthouse Square in Scranton, displaying information about other missing children in hopes that Jolene can help bring other kids home. Joan Lawrence was born in Ottawa, Ontario in 1921. As an adult, she worked as a copy editor for a Toronto newspaper and became a published poet. In the early 1960s, she moved to Huntsville, in Ontario's Muskoka region. Muskoka is a popular vacation destination due to its many lakes and natural beauty. It was around this time that Joan began fostering abandoned litters of kittens. For the rest of her life, she would affectionately be referred to as the cat lady on account of her love for the animals and the care she provided for them. By the mid-1990s, she had approximately 30 cats under her care. It was around this time that Joan's life became intertwined with the Lawn family. The Lands were outwardly a large God-fearing Seventh-day Adventist family. Several members of the family, however, had extensive criminal records. Most of these family members were heavily involved in the family businesses started in the early 1990s. The Land family began a string of Christian retirement homes that claimed to provide a full range of care services for a reasonable price in a home-like setting. In actuality, the homes were overcrowded and in poor shape. Residents slept on mattresses on the floor and were served cheap meals of rice, pasta, or macaroni and cheese. Not all of the homes had shower or toilet facilities. The majority of the residents of the Land's homes had no family to notice and object to this kind of treatment. The Lands trolled Toronto homeless shelters for new residents, telling vulnerable and lonely senior citizens that they could be cared for in the picturesque woods of cottage country in exchange for their monthly government pension check. The home Joan lived in was not technically home that claimed to provide care for his residents. Rather, it was more like an affiliated rental property for the elderly. Refusing to be separated from the cats she so loved, Joan had to live in a dilapidated shack behind the main house. The shack had no insulation, heat, running water, or electricity. For these terrible accommodations, the Lands took almost $700 a month from Joan in rent. That amount was almost the entirety of Joan's monthly government check. The two members of the Lawn family Joan interacted with the most were David Lawn, her landlord, and his uncle Vaughn Allen, who ostensibly was the handyman for the property. David would often give Joan a ride into town. On the days he didn't, she would walk the 8 miles so that she could buy food for her cats and take advantage of the free coffee at a local shop. She was well known to the people in town. In October 1998, however, Joan stopped coming into town. After a few weeks, the Ontario Provincial Police were called to investigate her disappearance. Around the time she went missing, Joan had been complaining to her friends in town that she had not received her much-needed income tax check. She had a friend who worked in a law office look into the matter just prior to her disappearance. The check had in fact been issued and arrived. After Joan confronted him twice, Ron Allen admitted that he had forged Joan's signature and cashed her check. Joan's bank account turned out to be a joint account shared with David Lane. Joan did not have a bank card, but David Lane did have one for the account. The bank card was used 6 times after Joan had last been seen. Ron Allen, despite seeing Joan almost every day prior to her disappearance, never reported her missing once he stopped seeing her. David Lane initially told authorities that he had no idea what happened to Joan. In subsequent, he gave outlander stories about Joan going into hiding from the police or being on a trip to New York or Hawaii or some other destination that Joan clearly could not afford to travel to. According to Joan's friends, she would never have abandoned her cats, even if she did have the financial means to leave the area on her own. During a search of Joan's shack in December 1998, police located the remains of several of Joan's cats. They had been shot. Joan was not the only resident of one of the land's retirement homes to go missing. John Semple, John Crafts, and Ralph Grant were all also residents in the homes who mysteriously went missing between 1998 and 1999. The lands never reported any of the men missing either. In an investigation into the 3 missing men's finances, it was discovered that the Lands had stolen tens of $1,000 on their retirement benefits and committed fraud by cashing their checks after they had gone missing. Various members of the Lynn family who worked for the retirement homes received either short conditional sentences or probation for the financial crimes. None of them ever actually spent time in prison. No one has ever been charged in relation to the men's disappearances. David Lane and Ron Allen were never convicted of any crime in relation to their financial dealings with Joan or her forged tax check. Joan remains missing, but feared dead. On paper, Samuel Todd seemed like someone with a clear path in life. He came from a long line on both sides of his family of people who were dedicated to both religious life and social. His father was a Presbyterian minister and the former director for urban mission at the World Council of Churches. His mother had taken Sam and his 3 brothers to celebrate the first Earth Day and protests against the Vietnam War. Sam entered his father's alma mater, Yale Divinity School, in 1981 after an undergraduate career at Vassar, full of volunteer work concerned with bettering the lives of those in the inner city and in third world countries, the same concentration his father's interests had. In actuality, Sam's life was somewhat chaotic. His father's career and his own desire to help others had led him to live in Asia, Europe, Africa, and all over the United States. According to one of his former roommates, he never even bothered to unpack when he moved into their dorm room, seeming to always be prepared for his inevitable next move. When he entered Yale Divinity, his plan was to pursue an academic degree rather than a ministerial one like his father before him, and eventually become a professor of religious studies. By his final year at Yale, however, he seemed to have turned to the pastoral path taken by father and grandfather. In the fall of 1983, he passed the first set of the Presbyterian Church's ordination exams. His academic performance in his Yale classes were far more spotty, however, and he was not certain that he would graduate in the spring of 1984 as scheduled. Sam had an aunt who was willing to help cover the costs of his education, but he did not always take advantage of this. Sam largely struggled to cover his bills from Yale and his rent payments with the funds from his part-time, $4 an hour job. With all these struggles and internal conflicts, it is understandable that Sam decided to blow off some steam by having a festive New Year's Eve. He was scheduled to leave for a religious conference with his parents on January 1st, 1984. He decided to spend New Year's Eve in New York City with his brother, Adam. Adam, Sam, and their group of friends spent the evening party hopping in Lower Manhattan. They ended up at a party at 271 Mulberry Street. By 1:30 a.m. on January 1st, Sam, who had been drinking both beer and vodka, was visibly drunk and unstable. Adam suggested that the two of them go outside to sober up in the frigid January air, so Sam stumbled downstairs with him. Sam, still not feeling better, told his brother that he was going to run around the block. Adam watched his brother jog towards Houston Street. He will be the last person to see Sam, Adam was uneasy about leaving Sam alone outside almost as soon as he came back inside. When Sam did not return to the party after a few minutes, Adam began a search that would escalate throughout the next hours and days. Adam and a group of friends began searching the streets and nearby parties. At 4:30 a.m., Adam called his oldest brother John, who drove in from New Jersey and helped Adam search hospitals. At 11 a.m., they went to the police to file New York City's first missing persons report of 1984. The volunteer search for Sam was massive. Its headquarters were set up in a Greenwich Village church and headed by Sam's brother. More than 20,000 flyers were plastered all over New York by friends of Sam, who came from all over the country to aid in the search. By the end of January, over half of Yale Divinity School's 400 students had volunteered for the cause in one capacity or another. The initial concern following Sam's disappearance was that he could have been involved in some sort of accident. He had been intoxicated and could have fallen and injured himself. New York had been filled with party-goers on the night he went missing, and many of them had been drinking as well. Another intoxicated person could have hit him with a car or started a fight with him that ended in his death. Sam was never brought to a hospital, and his body was never found, leaving these theories unproven. Another popular theory was that Sam decided to leave his life behind and go live amongst the homeless people he had spent so much of his life trying to help. Volunteers searched homeless shelters and soup kitchens for him, but never found him there. While theories in Sam's case abound, solid answers still remain scarce, and Sam has never been located. The case of Kelsey Smith went shopping for a gift and vanished without a trace. How often do laws enacted at the state level or the rules and policies of individual companies designed to protect people and make their lives more comfortable and safe end up causing harm rather than good? In today's story, a mobile phone operator refused to provide the location of a missing girl, citing privacy laws. In reality, however, the company was obstructing the investigation, delaying the process. Although tragically, it was too late to assist the girl. In other cases, timely access to such data could save someone's life. The case of young Kelsey Smith, who was tragically killed just a month after celebrating her 18th birthday, not only shook the United States but also captured the attention of the world as it was widely reported in international media. The girl was abducted in broad daylight from a crowded location, and her body, bearing signs of violence, was later discovered outside the city. The search for Kelsey took almost a week due to the inability to track her movements through her cell phone signal. This circumstance led to much debate and set a precedent that resulted in a series of amendments and the passage of a law named after the victim. But let's look at Kelsey Smith's story from the beginning and try to understand how she was abducted right outside a shopping center under the watch of dozens of surveillance cameras and whether this tragedy could have been avoided. We will also explore the personality of the abductor and criminal who was considered by all to be a loving husband and caring father. Who is Edwin Hall? We will begin our examination of this difficult case by getting to know the man who caused the terrible tragedy. Edwin Roy Hall, friends knew him as Jack Hall, was born in 1981, April 17th in the small town of Lee's Summit, located almost on the border of the states of Missouri and Kansas. He was the second child in the low-income and extremely disadvantaged family. Edwin's childhood was hard, if not to say harsh. Parents of the boy used in large quantities of hot drinks and illegal substances, not engaged in the upbringing of children and mistreated them. Later, Hall will tell about the fact that at the age of 5, he was intimately abused by his uncle, his father's brother, but unequivocally confirm or deny this statement is simply not possible. Many thought that this detail was invented by the perpetrator's lawyer in order to make his client look like a victim of circumstances at the trial and try to mitigate his punishment. But be that as it may, and at the age of 6, Edwin found himself in an orphanage after his father was behind bars and his mother was deprived of parental rights. In the following years, the boy changed several foster families. But each time, he was abandoned after a while and returned back to the orphanage. This was due to the uncontrolled aggression of the child, as well as his cruelty. From an early age, Hall showed sadistic tendencies towards animals. He liked to torture them and watch the suffering. The boy did not recognize anyone's authority, disobeyed his foster parents, stole, and ran away from home. His last foster family returned Edwin to state custody at the age of 15. This was after the teenager attacked his stepsister with a knife. Then the tragedy was avoided and the boy was pitted and not prosecuted. However, a year later, he again came to the attention of the police when he deliberately hit another orphanage pupil who was much younger than him on the head with a baseball bat. As an adult, Hall had no record with the police and he seemed to have matured, taken charge, and finally reformed. At the age of 20, he married a girl named Alida who bore him a son a year and a half later. Edwin got an old Chevrolet truck from the 70s on which he worked, transporting various goods. His neighbors knew him as a quiet, humble, and friendly guy, as well as a good family man. However, he also had another secret life, which became known only when Hall found himself in the dock for committing serious crimes. Who was the victim? Kelsey Smith. Kelsey and Smith was born in 1989 on May 3rd in a place called Overland Park, which ranks as the second most populous city in the state of Kansas. She was the third of 5 children in the large and very close-knit family of Gregory and Missy Smith. Growing up alongside her older brother Steve and sister Lindsay, as well as her younger siblings Caddy and Zach, she was very close to all of them. The family patriarch, Gregory Gregg Smith, was a former military man and a veteran of the United States Navy. He had also served in the police force for over 2 decades and was now enjoying his well-deserved retirement. Meanwhile, the mother, Missy Smith, had dedicated her life to health care, having worked for many years at one of the local hospitals. Despite her professional commitments, she brilliantly managed to balance work with raising her numerous offspring and creating a cozy home environment. From a young age, Kelsey was an extremely active, sociable, and theatrical child. She loved to sing and dance, attended a music school where she learned to play several musical instruments, and eagerly participated in school theater productions and choir performances. In addition to this, she thoroughly enjoyed gymnastics and loved soccer, often attending various sporting events with her father and brothers, and she was a fan of the local team. Young Smith had many friends, possessed a great sense of humor, was talented in numerous areas, and knew how to make a good impression on those around her. She also had a profound love for animals from childhood and dreamed of going to college after high school to pursue a career as a veterinarian. In her senior years of high school, Kelsey took a job in the local orchestra where she played the clarinet, performing at various city events. This job allowed her to save enough money in just 6 months to buy her first personal car, a 1987 Buick Regal. Her parents weren't too fond of the fact that her car was older than she was and offered to add some money from the family budget to buy something more recent. However, it was crucial for her to purchase her first vehicle independently with her own money, so she declined their offer. Kelsey's personal life. It's noteworthy that the Smiths went to great lengths to provide their children with the very best, caring deeply for their education and holistic development. However, they also raised their offspring with a strong sense of discipline. There were clear rules in their home that everyone abided by without exception. For instance, all family members were expected to share their plans and always inform each other if they were going to be out late. Kelsey herself was always punctual, never late, and would always tell her parents where she was going and who she was spending time with. During her senior year, Kelsey entered into a romantic relationship with a young man named John Beersmith. According to Kelsey, it was a deep and mutual love at first sight, the kind you read about in books or see in movies. The couple rang in the new year of 2007 together, and from then on were practically inseparable. Smith's partner, a year her senior, appeared to be a serious young man who treated his beloved with the utmost care and respect. Both sets of parents approved of their children's choice and did not stand in the way of their relationship. In May 2007, Kelsey celebrated her 18th birthday. That same month, she graduated from high school and was thrilled to learn that she had been accepted into a prestigious college in Kansas where she intended to study veterinary medicine. The following days were, without exaggeration, some of the happiest in the young woman's life. Unfortunately, they turned out to be her last. Smith, along with her classmates, attended parties celebrating the end of high school. She had a great time, fully enjoying the festive atmosphere as well as romantic dates with her beloved. At this point, She'd achieved everything she had wished for: admission into her dream college, a relationship with a worthy young man who was about to propose, and it seemed a long, happy life lay ahead of her. The disappearance from the mall parking lot. On June 2, 2007, Kelsey and John were preparing to celebrate a significant milestone in their relationship, the 6-month anniversary of when they first started dating. John planned to make the day even more memorable by proposing to Kelsey. He had a beautiful engagement ring custom made for the occasion, reserved a table for 2 at a restaurant, and the evening was set to be one of the happiest in their lives together. Kelsey was unaware of the upcoming proposal, which was meant to be a surprise. She too was looking for a gift to surprise and delight John. That Saturday, she styled her hair, did her makeup, dressed up, and drove her car to a Target Corporation store located just 10 minutes from her home. There was no indication of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Around 7 in the evening, she called her mother to say she had found a gift for John but needed to find the perfect gift bag for it, preferably something with a romantic touch. Missy suggested checking a shopping mall across the street from Target, confident that it would have what Kelsey was looking for. Kelsey thanked her mother for the advice and said she would be home soon, where John was supposed to pick her up at 8 o'clock. That was the last time Missy heard her daughter's voice. Kelsey never made it back home. When John arrived at 8 with a large bouquet of flowers, he was shocked and frightened to find that Kelsey was not there. Her parents were equally terrified, as it was completely out of character for her not to answer phone calls or texts. She vanished in broad daylight in a busy area, and no one noticed her disappearance. Search and investigation. The family patriarch, along with his 2 eldest children, set out to search for their daughter. Upon finding her car parked at the Oak Park Mall, a sliver of hope emerged that Kelsey might still be inside the mall for some unknown reason. However, after searching through all the floors and stores and inquiring with the salespeople and security guards if anyone had seen the girl, they were convinced she was not there. Returning to the car, which appeared undisturbed without any signs of struggle or violence, the father, leveraging his experience as a former police officer, decided not to touch anything. It was possible the car was part of a crime scene, and it was crucial not to tamper with or destroy any evidence. The girl's parents reported her missing to the police that same day, but were initially met with resistance to start an immediate search. The explanation was that since Kelsey was 18, she wouldn't legally be considered missing until 24 hours had passed since her disappearance. However, Kelsey's father, not one to back down and using his old connections, insisted on an immediate search for his daughter. Moreover, he made inquiries to see if any hospitals in the city had admitted women matching their daughter's description. Kelsey's family and fiancé were interviewed that same evening to establish their alibis and rule them out as suspects, a standard procedure. Surveillance footage from the Target store was also reviewed. The videos showed Kelsey entering the store, browsing the selection, making a purchase, and then while talking on the phone, leaving the building to head back to her car. At that moment, she was speaking with her mother, asking where to find a gift bag, and then headed to the mall across the street following her mother's advice. Essentially, Kelsey simply drove out, turned around, and parked at the Oak Park Mall, leaving her car near the side entrance almost against the wall. Her car was thoroughly inspected by experts. It seemed untouched from the outside. The gift she bought for John was on the passenger seat, and her backpack with personal items, a tablet, and a wallet containing about $300 in cash was in the back. Therefore, a robbery was quickly ruled out. It appeared that the car's owner had left only with her credit card and phone in her pocket, as everything else remained inside the car. No signs of a struggle, blood, or damage were found. There were no foreign fingerprints except for one found on the driver's seatbelt. This fingerprint belonged to neither Kelsey, her relatives, nor her boyfriend. Issues with the cellular company tracking the young woman's location could have been possible through the signal of her mobile phone. By that time, the device itself had become inaccessible, presumably turned off or damaged, but it was still feasible to determine the last known location where the mobile phone was active in order to narrow down the search area. However, Verizon Communications, the wireless carrier, did not provide the necessary data for the investigation for several days. Interestingly, the company did not outright refuse to cooperate but kept promising to look into the matter, effectively dragging out the process. Back in 2007, telecommunications companies were allowed to withhold subscriber data from law enforcement agencies, including the police or FBI, without a specific court order. They cited information privacy laws, and even situations where an individual's safety or life might be at risk were not considered exceptions to this rule. The disturbing stranger. Upon closer examination of the surveillance footage, a chilling detail was uncovered: a mysterious stranger following the young woman like a shadow. He didn't stand out at first because he always kept his distance and didn't attempt to interact with Kelsey directly. The individual in question was a Caucasian male with a pleasant appearance, estimated to be in his early to mid-20s, sporting dark, short hair and a light beard. He was dressed casually in a plain white t-shirt and black shorts. He entered the Target store roughly half a minute after the girl and followed her through all the sections she visited, maintaining a few meters distance. This mysterious man was captured by all the surveillance cameras that Kelsey was. And later during the trial, the prosecution would describe his behavior as akin to a predator stalking its prey. He exited the store after her and, making sure she was alone, followed her to the Oak Park parking lot in his Chevrolet truck. It's likely that he overheard her conversation with her mother, as he was practically behind Kelsey while she was on the phone. Consequently, he could have learned about her plans to visit the neighboring shopping center. Unfortunately, Smith parked her car in a poorly chosen spot next to a side door near a storage area where shadows fell on her vehicle, making it nearly impossible to discern the events on the camera footage. While Kelsey was still seated in her car, the truck parked beside her and a figure in a white t-shirt and black shorts emerged. The stranger approached her from the driver's side door, and then she, presumably under the threat of harm, got behind the wheel of his Chevrolet and the truck drove off in an unknown direction. Media attention and alert viewers. From the outset, largely thanks to the connections and experience of Gregory Smith, the media were enlisted to cover the investigation. Smith knew that the louder the outcry, the broader the coverage in the press, and the more attention it garnered, the higher the chances of finding their daughter and bringing the responsible party to justice. The story was covered not only in national, but also in international media, including on the popular show America's Most Wanted. When surveillance footage revealed the mysterious stranger following Kelsey, the frame showing his face most clearly were broadcasted in the news, urging people to come forward if they recognized the man. That same evening, the police began receiving calls from individuals claiming to have seen the man in various cities and even states. Although most of these reports were mistaken, each one was investigated. On June 6th, a Mrs. Miguez called in stating she recognized her neighbor Edwin Hall in the footage, but had hesitated to report it initially due to doubt. However, seeing the information about the truck removed her last doubts, as Hall also drove an old 1970s Chevrolet. Horrific discovery at Longview Lake and suspect's arrest. On June 6, 2007, several pivotal events unfolded in the investigation. First, crucial data regarding the last known location of Kelsey's phone signal was finally obtained from Verizon Communications. A specific cell tower was pinpointed, establishing a search radius of 1.1 miles to the north of it. Within 45 minutes of initiating the search operation, the lifeless body of the young woman was found in the brush near Longview Lake, Missouri, approximately 30 miles from where she was abducted. The medical examiners determined that Kelsey had been brutally assaulted and then strangled with her own belt. Her body was discovered without clothing, except for the belt used to strangle her around her neck. After the assault, her body was callously discarded in the bushes, covered only slightly with dry branches. Over the 4 days it lay exposed under the June sun, her remains were severely disfigured by insects and other wildlife, making them almost unrecognizable. Nonetheless, the examination confirmed that it was indeed the missing young Smith. The second significant event on June 6th was the arrest of the main suspect. When the police arrived at the man's residence, he was completely calm, acknowledged that his friends called him Jack, and agreed to provide a statement at the station. During the interrogation, he identified himself as Edwin Hall. Presented with a photograph of Kelsey, he claimed never to have seen her before. Even when shown surveillance footage from the store showing him following her closely, he insisted he had merely visited Target for personal reasons and hadn't noticed her, suggesting their appearance together in the footage was merely a bizarre coincidence. Irrefutable evidence. Edwin was evidently confident that he had left no trace behind and could not be held accountable. His van was clean. He had assaulted the victim using contraception, leaving no DNA evidence. Therefore, Hall agreed to cooperate with the investigation and even volunteered to provide his DNA sample and fingerprints. Crucially, his thumbprint matched the one found on the victim's car's seat belt buckle, becoming a pivotal piece of evidence. Furthermore, during a thorough search of the suspect's home, a hidden air pistol was found with Kelsey's DNA traces on the barrel. Hall was then officially charged with the abduction, assault, and termination of the young woman's life. Since Smith was abducted in Kansas but her lifeless body was discovered in Missouri, there arose a question regarding the jurisdiction of the trial. This detail was significantly important as it affected the potential sentence. In Missouri, the perpetrator faced the possibility of capital punishment. Trial and sentence Hall, realizing the gravity of his situation and after consulting with his attorney, decided to fully admit his guilt and disclose the details and circumstances of the crime in hopes of receiving a lesser sentence. He recounted how he noticed Kelsey as she entered the store and followed her. Indeed, he was close enough to overhear her phone conversation, learning she planned to visit the shopping center across the street. Edwin made sure Smith was alone, followed her to the adjacent parking lot, and was pleased when she parked in a secluded spot near the side entrance. He then emerged from his vehicle armed with a pistol, waited for the victim to return to her car, and prevented her from closing the door as she was getting into the driver's seat. Apparently, she had already pulled out the seatbelt, but he didn't allow her to buckle up, leaving his print on it in the process. Next, he placed the pistol barrel in the unfortunate girl's mouth, coercing her to move to his vehicle's driver's seat under threat. Smith drove Hall's truck while he aimed the weapon at her and instructed where to go. Upon reaching a remote area at the state border, he ordered her out of the truck and led her into the bushes. There, he assaulted her, strangled her with the belt, and covered her body with branches. He meticulously cleaned his truck's cabin to remove any fingerprints, DNA, or other traces of the victim's presence and hid the pistol with Kelsey's saliva at his home, confident it would never be found. When asked about his motive, he couldn't provide a clear explanation, but indifferently commented on her fantastic legs. Additionally, during the investigation, several other women and girls victimized by Hall's actions came forward. As a result, charges of corruption of a minor harassment and theft were added to the existing accusations. Hall's lawyer attempted to appeal to the court's sympathy, highlighting his client's troubled childhood, past victimhood, lack of parental care, and upbringing in foster homes. The defense's efforts were in vain, but the lawyer was the only person to speak on the defendant's behalf and support him. Hall's wife was present at all court hearings, but sat quietly in a corner refusing to defend her husband. On September 16, 2008, Johnson County's judge sentenced Edwin Roy Hall to 27 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After hearing the verdict, the defendant apologized to the Smith family for his actions and then broke down in tears. He is currently serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Kansas. The Kelsey Smith Act. The role of Verizon Communications in this case, which hesitated for 4 days to provide data regarding the last known location of the missing girl's phone signal, drew significant attention. The company's leadership cited privacy laws and the absence of a court order, the issuance of which would take time. Although it was later determined that this information wouldn't have saved young Smith, in other situations, it could help preserve the lives and health of individuals in danger. This led to the enactment of the Kelsey Smith Act by Kansas in 2009, mandating telecommunications companies to provide subscriber location information when there is a risk of death or serious physical harm to the individual. An additional 29 states, including Missouri by 2012, adopted similar legislation. In 2021, Oklahoma, Montana, and Illinois also passed the Kelsey Smith Act. Since its enactment, this law has helped save many lives. For instance, in 2015, in Lenexa, Kansas, when a perpetrator stole a car with a child in a car seat, the police were able to locate him within half an hour by tracking the signal from the mobile phone left on the back seat by the child's mother. In 2021 in Illinois, a similar method was used to find a young woman who attempted to end her life by jumping off a cliff. She survived, albeit with significant injuries, but the prompt tracking of her phone signal led to her rescue. Interestingly, the Smith family never requested the law to be named after their deceased daughter. The idea came from Kansas Senator Rob Olson. Following their tragedy, the girl's family established a foundation to assist crime victims and continues to raise awareness among young people about safety issues. Ben Rank was just 29 years old when he was found deceased in his renowned snake breeding facility. Benjamin Blue Birch Rank was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in the countryside alongside his family. Ben had an older brother, Sam, with whom he shared a very close bond. In 1989, the Rank family moved to a picturesque farmhouse. The boys spent a lot of their time outdoors, and it was then that Ben began to take an interest in snakes. A tragic incident in September 1992 triggered a series of unfortunate events. The family was away when a gas leak occurred, leading to an explosion in their beautiful home. The Ranks were forced to move into a trailer. After some time, Ben's mother Kim was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Despite these hardships, the family overcame them. They were very close-knit and always supported each other in any situation. Recovering from previous tragedies, in 2002, they moved to a new home where a special room was designed for Ben to keep his snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Kim passed away. Before her death, she made her sons promise to look after the farm and pass it on to their children. As time went by, Ben's love for snakes knew no bounds, and the young man founded Rennick Reptiles, which soon gained recognition. This allowed him to sell snakes worldwide from the United Kingdom to Japan. Breeding snakes became the meaning of his life. He was described as a great breeder who was devoted to his work, caring more about the snakes than the money. The reptile farm bred a multitude of reptilian subspecies, growing and reproducing both the most common species and some of the rarest subspecies on Earth. Ben's reptiles were of immense value. Just a portion of his python collection was valued at over $1 million. Ben was a solitary man who had long aspired to start a. In 2010, at a party, he met a woman named Lindley. Their relationship moved forward quickly. Within weeks, Ben introduced his girlfriend to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé Eli. Eli and Lindley had sons from previous relationships, so they found common ground quickly and became friends. Lindley soon became part of the Rank family. The couple began living together. Lindley helped Ben at the snake breeding farm. They were in love and lived as a full family. In March 2012, Lindley gave birth to their daughter Amelia. Ben was thrilled to become a father. However, the happy family life faced challenges again. Frank Rank, Ben's father, encountered significant business troubles. Previously, he had engaged in fraudulent stock transactions to cover medical bills and Kim's treatment expenses. Just a day before the FBI planned to visit the farm, Frank took his own life. Frank's passing halted the investigation. The sons were deeply affected by another parental loss, but managed to pull through by supporting each other. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received an amount of money far exceeding the house's value. Each brother had their own family and children, but this didn't stop them from living as one big family in their parents' home. They lived together harmoniously, with Sam spending his inheritance on repairing the farm without hesitation. Initially, things were fine, but soon financial disputes caused friction between the brothers after their father's death. Ben focused on his business and family and decided to formalize his relationship with Lindley on April 14, 2014. They married, officially adding Lindley as a full-fledged member of the Rank household. Ben and Lindley also opened a spa named Essentia Spa Incorporated, but it faced financial difficulties under Lindley's management. Financial issues often led to arguments between them, despite Lindley's hard work being insufficient to cover all salon expenses consistently. At the same time, Sam and his wife faced significant financial challenges. Ben allowed them to sell some of the furniture of the house. Lindley disapproved, leading to a rift between the families. The relationship was irreparably damaged. Ben decided to improve the family's financial situation by arranging to sell some rare reptiles for a significant sum. However, the deal fell through due to a tragedy that occurred on the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindley walked into one of the farm's barns. There, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay Ben. Lindley called her brother Sam for help and dialed the emergency number. She reported that she had found her husband unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindley dropped the phone and ran outside. Sam continued the conversation and confirmed that his brother was dead. Sam suggested that a snake might be to blame for what had happened. Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies were called to the snake breeding facility for the first time in a long while. Law enforcement officers were afraid to enter the farm, facing over 3,000 snakes, and having to conduct an examination of a man lying in blood, wary of a possible attack from a deadly viper believed to be the assailant. However, when coroner Dave Colbert arrived and took a closer look, he discovered a shell casings on a shelf at eye level. This was something far more sinister than a venomous snake bite. Shell casings were found near the body, but no weapon was discovered. The assailant had shot Ben multiple times in the back and head. None of the relatives heard shots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindley were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindley suggested that Sam might be involved in her husband's death, even citing a motive. Apparently, Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was opposed. Sam was asked to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed. The police had no reason to detain Lindley and Sam, so they were released. The investigation into who might have wanted Ben Renk dead began with various theories proposed. The first being robbery, but it remained unconfirmed, as none of the rare snakes were missing and all valuable items remained untouched. Just days after Ben's demise, police interrogated Lindley again and tested her hands and clothing for gunpowder residue. However, results came back negative. Following her husband's funeral, Lindley ceased communication with Sam and Eli altogether. She sold her husband's business, inherited the house, and sought to claim a life insurance payout for Ben worth $1 million after receiving the insurance money. Lindley planned to sell the Rennick family home for $740,000. Sam's family was notified about the eviction. Discovering the rapid insurance claim and business sale following her husband's passing, Sam Rennick suspected his brother's wife in the tragic event. Sharing his suspicions with investigators, Lindley was called in for another interrogation. There, she admitted to having complex relations with Ben and occasionally meeting with a man named Eric. Eric had an alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Lindley's admissions were startling. It turned out about 3 years after their marriage was officially registered, she was unfaithful to Ben with at least 2 different men. Messages between the couple showed that Ben suspected his wife of infidelity, which had indeed strained their relationship lately. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted a polygraph test on Lindley and informed her that she had failed it. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, she was released. Nevertheless, the investigation into Ben Rennick's case slowed but did not cease. Later investigators learned that a month before Ben Rennick's passing, Lindley had made her first attempt on his life. She concocted a story of Ben being a cruel tyrant who oppressed her daily and even physically assaulted her. She shared the story with a spa salon co-worker to garner support and assistance. They plotted to end Ben's life by giving him a poisonous protein shake laced with 15 Percocet pills. Unaware, Ben drank it. He fell severely ill during that period but survived, oblivious to having been poisoned. Lindley Rennick was interrogated by investigators 6 times in total, and further assistance in the investigation came unexpectedly. On January 14, 2020, information from a state prison emerged. A witness claimed to know about Ben Rennick's death. The witness was Brandon Blackwell. He told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindley had shot Ben and conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon mentioned that he had dated Lindley while she was married to Ben. 1.5 years after Ben's death, they had a child together. But by 2019, they had separated. Brandon claimed that Lindley confessed to the act and conspired with her spa salon co-worker, Ashley Shore, and another ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. Years after Ben's demise, Lindley Rennick and her former boyfriend Michael Humphrey were arrested for his death. However, following their arrest, Lindley and Humphrey pointed fingers at each other. So who really pulled the trigger? According to Michael's testimony on the day of the event, he went to the farm with Lindley, who asked him to pose as a buyer. He put on gloves and was supposed to shoot Ben but couldn't do it. Eventually, Lindley took the gun and shot her husband herself. The investigation into Ben Rennick's death continued for 3 long years. On January 16, 2020, arrest warrants were issued for Lindley Rennick, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation and testified against her boss. The former spa salon employee shared that Lindley had complained about her husband and convinced her to assist in a plan. She claimed that Ben was constantly belittling, demeaning, and even physically harming her. Fearing divorce would lead to Ben gaining custody of her children, Lindley decided to eliminate him. Planning together to poison him with a lethal cocktail during questioning, Lindley and Michael accused each other of Ben's demise. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey faced trial in M County. His lawyers hoped that revealing the murder weapon would lead to a second-degree murder charge. Despite possessing the gun, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To lessen his sentence, Michael Humphrey made a deal with the prosecution by disclosing the location of the murder weapon. His cooperation led to a life sentence on a less severe charge of second-degree murder without defense at the trial. On January 3, 2021, Michael Humphrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The against Lindley Rennick began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with the shooting and demise of Ben Rennick on June 8, 2017, at his snake breeding facility in New Florence. Court documents stated that the plot to end Ben Rennick's life originated in Lindley's spa salon. The probable cause statement mentioned that Ben was aware of Lindley's financial troubles and that Lindley feared Ben could take her children away. This led her to fabricate a story of domestic abuse. The first attempt to end Ben Rennick involved a protein shake laced with narcotics. Search warrants for Ben and Lindley Rennick's Facebook accounts confirmed the protein shake story and Ben's awareness of Lindley's financial issues. The court hearing detailed the events of the day when Ben Rennick was killed, fully reconstructing the sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the incident, Michael Humphrey picked up Lindley from the spa salon, while Shaw sent text messages from Lindley's phone inside the spa to conceal their true location and mislead the investigation. According to court documents, Humphrey intended to end Ben's life but asked Lindley to do it. After firing shots, Humphrey collected most of the casings, but missed some in his haste. He also disposed of Lindley's clothing after returning to the spa, where Lindley took a shower, which helped avoid detection of gunpowder residue on her hands and clothes. Defense attorney Catherine Barrouz asked Lindley Rennick to share her personal and family history, education, relationship with ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, work history, and the lead-up to her marriage with Ben Rennick. This was aimed at portraying her as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, undermining this defense narrative. Michael Humphrey was part of a group that allegedly planned to end Ben Rennick's life. Lindley Rennick described her relationship with Humphrey as codependent, involving his drug dealing and her addiction. She ended her relationship with Humphrey at the end of 2010, according to previous witness statements, but reconnected with him about a month before Ben Rennick's death. Lindley Rennick firmly denied the prosecution's allegations regarding the alleged plans to end Ben Rennick's life. This included the supposed failed attempt to poison Ben with a protein shake containing narcotics. The couple faced financial and marital difficulties. The spa center wasn't doing well, and contractual deals for selling snakes had yet to provide financial benefits. In court, Lindley admitted to having extramarital relationships with several men, expressing deep regret for her actions. By the time she considered discussing divorce, she was unsure who to turn to, given her father's history with divorce and his strong views on both divorce and affairs. Seeking someone to support her in her conversation with Ben, she reached out to past boyfriends and reconnected with Michael Humphrey. During cross-examination by the prosecution, Lindley confessed to willingly participating in her husband's death and intentionally concealing Michael Humphrey's involvement. She cited marital difficulties, including disputes, alleged physical and sexual abuse by Ben, and the stress associated with his snake breeding business. Lindley feared Ben and worried about his reaction whenever she brought up the topic of divorce. On June 8, 2017, she brought Michael Humphrey to the farm that day. She claimed her presence at the farm was not meant to end her husband's life, but rather to discuss a divorce. Lindley mentioned taking out some trash from Ben before entering the nursery, where she saw Humphrey and Ben washing their hands. Lindley described being unable to hear their conversation, as she was preoccupied with how she would tell Ben she wanted a divorce. Her voice trembled, while recounting seeing Humphrey draw a pistol and shoot her husband. Hence, she heard more shots. Reality hit hard when Lindley returned to the snake breeding facility and found Ben's body. She called Ben's brother Sam, who arrived soon after. They checked for a pulse and whether Ben was breathing, hoping he might still be alive. Lindley expressed regret for not immediately informing police that she had been at the breeding facility earlier with Michael Humphrey. The life insurance policy that Ben had taken out years earlier could have resulted in a payout of $1 million. However, Lindley waived her rights to this money. During the court hearing, Lindley expressed regrets about her ongoing deceit. "I was just trying to escape from the truth of what happened," she stated, clarifying that she never wished for her husband's death. Following the final verdict, Lindley Renke's defense team chose not to petition for a new trial, and no appeals were filed against her conviction. Lindley Renke filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, asserting that his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindley's testimony during cross-examination. He queried why she didn't check on her husband after hearing gunshots and why she didn't call 911. Furthermore, he asked why she sent friendly messages to him and Humphrey after the shooting and continued to lie even when emergency responders got involved. During sentencing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindley Renke broke down but did not admit guilt. On December 9, 2021, she was found guilty of second-degree murder. The 33-year-old was sentenced to 13 years for murder and an additional 3 years for armed criminal action in January by Judge Kevin Crane, a total sentence of 16 years. Sam Renke's final words conveyed deep disappointment. He was astonished that an individual's life in Missouri could be valued at just 13 years. Ben Renke, a young man brimming with hope and a promising future, found himself in a dire situation due to the actions of one woman. On January 7, 1969, Jane Britton did not appear for an exam, which was highly unusual for the Harvard graduate student. The daughter of a distinguished scholar, she had graduated magna cum laude from Radcliffe College with her bachelor's degree before pursuing advanced studies in anthropology. Her classmate and boyfriend, James Humphreys, tried calling her after the exam to check on her. When she didn't answer, he went to her fourth-floor apartment on University Road. At 12:40 p.m., James found Jane's body face down on her bed. On the evening of January 6th, Jane had spent time with friends and her boyfriend before stopping by her neighbor's apartment for a glass of sherry around 11:30 p.m. on her way home. The autopsy revealed alcohol in her stomach but none in her blood, indicating she was attacked shortly after returning home. It also showed she had been sexually assaulted and died from a brutal beating that caused skull fragments to cut and bruise her brain. A neighbor reported hearing someone on the fire escape that night, leading police to suspect the attacker used it to enter Jane's apartment. Jane's case garnered national media attention, but the investigation ultimately went cold. In July 2018, the Massachusetts State Police got a soft hit in the FBI's combined DNA index system to DNA found at James' crime scene. The DNA that remained available for testing yielded a YSTR profile, a type of profile that is specific to men because it involves analysis of the Y chromosome. They were able to confirm the match after finding a DNA profile on Ancestry.com that belonged to a male relative of the killer. The relative provided a fresh sample that confirmed the match. On November 20, 2018, the Middlesex County District Attorney announced that James' killer had been identified through DNA as Michael Sumter, a career criminal who died of cancer in 2001 at 54 shortly after completing a prison sentence for a rape he committed in 1975. The new DNA tests eliminate 99.92% of the male population as contributors of the DNA at the crime scene, confirmed the soft hit in Cody's, and eliminated Michael's brother as a possible contributor of the DNA. Since his death, Michael has also been identified as the perpetrator in 4 other sexual assaults, 2 of which also resulted in the murder of the victim. Jane's case is the oldest cold case solved by the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office in its history. Leslie Marie Perlov was a graduate of Stanford University. The 21-year-old was working at the North County Law Library in Palo Alto, California, while waiting to begin law school at the University of Pennsylvania in 1973. She was a brilliant and dedicated student, but her hard work would tragically never culminate in an Ivy League law degree. Lisa was last seen alive at work on February 13, 1973 at 3 p.m. That same day, her Chevrolet Nova was found abandoned near a quarry off of Old Page Mill Road. 3 days later, her body was discovered west of where her car had been found, under an oak tree. She had been strangled and left face down with her skirt pulled up past her waist. The case would have to wait for technology to advance before it could be solved. In July 2018, DNA found on Leslie's body was submitted to Parabon Nanolabs, a company in Virginia that combines DNA analysis with forensic genealogy. Using the information the lab provided, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office was able to identify a suspect. They collected a discarded DNA sample, a sample collected from an item used by the suspect that they have thrown away or left behind somewhere, to confirm that the suspect's DNA matched the sample from Leslie's body. On November 20, 2018, the suspect, 74-year-old John Arthur Geitrault, was arrested and charged with murder during an attempted rape in connection with Leslie's death. The odds of someone other than Geitrault contributing the DNA found on Leslie's body have been estimated to be 1 in 65 septillion. Geitrault had been working as a security guard in Palo Alto in 1973. This was in spite of the fact that in 1964 he had raped and killed the 16-year-old daughter of the chaplain for the Army's 8th Infantry Division. The crime occurred in Germany, where Gertrude's father, who was an officer in the Army, was stationed. Since 18-year-old Geitrault was considered a juvenile under German law, he was eligible to be released and sent back to the United States after just 2 years in prison. In the end, it was Leslie and her tenacity that helped authorities close the case. At a press conference announcing Geitrault's arrest, Santa Clara County Deputy District Attorney Matt Bracker said, "Leslie Perlov solved this case because she fought desperately for her life. In the process, she gathered the DNA evidence that was used to identify the killer." 25-year-old Christy Myrick was a 6th grade teacher at Roarstown Elementary School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. On December 21, 1992, Christy's roommate left for work at 7 a.m. while Christy was watching some TV before leaving herself. Christy's normal routine was to wake up early so she could have a leisurely morning before leaving for work at 7:45. However, she never arrived at school that morning. When Christy failed to show up for work, the principal of the school tried calling her home multiple times but received no answer. He then called Christy's mother to see if she had heard from her. She had not. She gave the principal Christy's address, and he began to drive to her home, hoping to see her car broken down somewhere along her route. He did not. When he arrived at Christy's apartment, the front door was cracked open. Inside, the principal discovered Christy's badly beaten body. He would later be determined that she had been strangled and raped. Evidence at the scene suggested that Christy had fiercely fought her killer. She was still wearing her coat and gloves, as though she had been attacked just as she was leaving the house. As the person who discovered Christy's body, the principal was an early suspect, as was Christy's boyfriend, who turned out to be a married man 20 years her senior. All of these potential early suspects were quickly ruled out. 26 years after the murder, DNA evidence would point the investigation to a complete surprise of a suspect. DNA had been found on and near Christy's body, but her killer's DNA was not in any criminal database, so police could never find a match for it. In 2015, the case was taken over by a cool case unit. In 2017, The unit also reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, who generated a composite of what the killer may have looked like at different ages based on the traits in his DNA. The composites were released to the public in November 2017, but no one reported knowing anyone who resembled them. In 2018, forensic genealogist Cece Moore, in partnership with Parabon, entered the DNA profile from the crime scene into an open-source genealogy site to locate distant relatives of the perpetrator. From there, she was able to narrow down the suspect pool to a family in Lancaster County and ultimately identify a single suspect. The police surveilled the suspect and collected a water bottle and some chewing gum the suspect discarded. When the DNA from these items was tested, it was a match to the DNA from the crime scene. On June 25, 2018, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office announced the arrest of Raymond Charles Rowe for Christie's murder. 49-year-old Rowe was well known in the local community. He was a local DJ, publicly known as DJ Freeze. In 1992, he was the house DJ at the Chameleon Club, a popular music venue, and by 2018, he was one of the most sought-after wedding DJs in Lancaster County. He was a husband and a father and had recently become very religious. His only criminal charge was for disorderly conduct, which was incurred in 2001 when he played music too loudly while DJing. That charge was ultimately dismissed. Rowe is expected to go to trial in May of 2019, more than 26 years after the murder of Christy Myrick. On March 19, 1993, a 6-year-old boy in Toronto called 911. The child had woken up and discovered the body of his mother, 41-year-old Barbara Brodkin. When the police arrived at the apartment at 155 Balliol Street, they discovered that Barbara had been stabbed once in the chest. During their initial investigation, authorities interviewed over 100 people but could not make an arrest in the case. The case was reopened. Evidence from her crime scene was submitted in hopes that it would reveal DNA evidence that could not have been identified in 1993. The effort was successful. On October 19, 2018, police arrested 63-year-old Charles Mustard. Charles was known to police, which is why his DNA was available for them to compare to the DNA for the crime scene. A small amount of money and marijuana had been missing from Barbara's apartment, leading police to initially believe that Barbara had been the victim of a robbery. But Charles was an acquaintance of Barbara and her family, meaning there may have been a more personal motive in the crime. While police believe the DNA evidence proves that Charles committed the crime, they still have an appeal to the public to help with the case. They asked at a news conference following Charles's arrest for 2 individuals, known only to them as Linda and Dirk, to come forward. Linda and Dirk were reportedly acquaintances of both Barbara and Charles, and authorities believe they may have important information that may help in convicting Charles. 35-year-old Charles Clark of Mentor, Ohio planned to spend Christmas Eve of 1959 caroling with the Boy Scout troop. He was the leader of the Father of 4, was also a Sunday school superintendent and an engineer at Reliance Electric at 6:40 p.m. He was in his kitchen opening a can of pumpkin for his wife who was making pie for Christmas dinner. Charles was then shot in his right temple, the kitchen window. He fell to the floor and died, clad in his Boy Scout uniform. Charles's 12-year-old daughter Carol told police that her father had only been in front of the window for 4 seconds, meaning that the killer had been lying in wait and must have been a skilled sniper. Suspicion quickly turned to a man named Floyd Hargrove. Hargrove was a 34-year-old divorced truck driver. He had served as a rifleman in the Air Force, where he had earned a medal for sharpshooting. He was also one of 6 men Charles Clark's wife, Lois, had admitted to having an affair with. Hargrove was arrested for the murder a mere 3 hours after it occurred. He was released after he passed a polygraph examination. He was rearrested 5 days later after police received a phone call from a friend of Hargrove's named John Ozinger Jr. According to Ozinger, Hargrove had confessed to him that he had purchased a .22 caliber rifle on December 23rd for the purpose of killing Charles Clark. Under a purported truth serum administered by a psychiatrist, Hargrove did admit to killing Charles so that he would be able to marry Lois. He further stated that he had thrown the rifle into the Chagrin River after the crime. At his trial in 1960, He claimed that he had only confessed because police were threatening to make his affair with Lois public, and he desperately wanted to keep it a secret. He did concede that he had wanted to marry Lois, going so far as to ask her to divorce Clark in the summer of 1959, but she had refused to, not wanting to hurt her husband's feelings. On June 8, 1960, a jury found Hargrove not guilty. A juror told a reporter that while members of the jury thought that it was possible that Hargrove committed the crime, the state did not successfully prove that he did. Lois Clark received over $100,000 in life insurance following her husband's death. She denied any prior knowledge of the crime, and Charles Clark's parents publicly supported her, even after her infidelity came to light. No one else has ever been brought to trial for the murder, so Charles's case remains unsolved. Cesar Torralba lived in Asbury Park, New Jersey, with his wife Minerva and their 2 young daughters. On Christmas Eve of 2007, he left his family's apartment on 6th Street to visit the Super Extra grocery store. His father was flying in from Mexico for Christmas, and Cesar wanted to make stuffed chilies for Christmas dinner for him. He successfully purchased the necessary ingredients for the meal, but ran into trouble before he could make it home. Minerva Torralba heard her husband's voice outside their apartment and assumed that he was chatting with one of her neighbors, as he often did. She looked out the peephole on her front door to see who he was speaking with, but she did not see a friendly face. Instead, she saw an unfamiliar African-American man dressed in black with a gun pointed on her husband. Minerva ran for her phone to call 911, but she heard a gunshot from outside before she could even reach it. Cesar passed away an hour later. He died 16 days short of his 36th birthday. The Torralbas received an outpouring of support from their community following the murder. The Guardian Angels, the nonprofit community safety patrol, came to Asbury Park to pass out flyers looking for information. 3 weeks after Cesar was killed, more than 150 people marched in Asbury Park to protest the violence in their community. Despite these community efforts, no suspect was ever identified. Minerva Torralba continues to speak to the media and pressure local authorities to stay focused on the case, hoping that one day she will be able to get justice for her late husband. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.